That was the story of the Rand last week. Will it hold as the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivers the second version of a speech that was aborted when members of his own party, the ANC, and opposition politicians balked at his proposal to lift VAT by 2%. Well, that will depend very much on the devil in the minister's details. Hello, more VAT, even if by 0.75% increase seems like a likely possibility. But that social relief of distress grant, initially a temporary crisis measure during COVID, looks set to stay. Our next guest argues that these may not necessarily be the trade-offs that should even be on the table. It's runaway spending, not VAT, that is the problem. And Bernstein is the executive director of the Center for Development and Enterprise, the CDE, and joins us now on the line. And a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
The budget debacle that we saw, of course, with that unprecedented cancellation minutes before it was due to be delivered, you argue, should in fact present us an opportunity.
I do. I think that the debacle was not good and it has negative consequences in all sorts of ways. On the other hand, maybe this is the affirmation of a real coalition government. But the issue is not that. The issue is 15 years of spending more than we should have, and not spending it on good things. In the main, we've spent it on the revenue we collect every year on things that have not been very productive at all. And we're saying that we shouldn't be raising taxes. We should be looking at how we spend our tax revenue much more efficiently to the benefit of all South Africans. So grossly inefficient government expenditure, it's time to look at that very carefully and make some fundamental cuts, and then have a team of cabinet ministers who are going to look for more cuts through the course of the next few months. We are, after all, talking about a 3-year budget. It's not just this budget, but the medium-term expenditure framework is for 3 years.
We'll get into the details of where some of that trimming of the fat could be. But of course, the other problem is even as we spend, we're getting deeper and deeper into debt.
Absolutely. We've gone from a sort of debt to GDP ratio of 25% to now 75% and rising. And for repaying our debt is the single largest and fastest rising item on our budget. What a waste. Think of all the great things we could do with this money. But it's not like we've borrowed this money to improve our infrastructure. What we've used this money for is too many low-impact programs, too many people overpaid in leadership positions in the state who don't spend our money effectively, too many public servants who don't do their job well enough or at all, and too many failing state-owned companies that we keep having to bail out. And we don't seem to ever make real progress. So on too many of those. So this is the opportunity to really rethink South Africa's budget.
And the other concern that has been raised is that not all of us are paying our fair share. SARS is once again reputed to have some of the best measures in the world and is once more the envy of many agencies. What's missing on that front?
Well, firstly, don't forget that state capture destroyed one of the most important institutions in SARS, a unit that went after, let's call them high net wealth people who don't pay their taxes or don't pay enough. So we know that there are people who are evading tax, and we certainly support giving SARS 3 billion, 3.5 billion, and saying, go and get that extra tax. We don't know how much it is, but go and get it. And let's do that before we even consider raising additional revenue from citizens who are struggling in the current situation.
I mentioned the SRD grant in my introduction, but there are other spending pressures. Government is still the largest employer in the land. You talked about SOEs that are a drain on the fiscus. Let's talk Transnet, for example, because that's current. They'll be listening very keenly to what the minister has to say. None of these things can be readily wished away.
Well, no, but we have identified a menu of cuts you could make immediately. Let me make another point. You can't build a budget for Wednesday on hope. Hope is not a strategy. You have to say, what are the numbers we're putting in the budget for the next year or for the next 3 years? And we're saying, in the circumstances we face, you have to put on the table the 5.5% wage increase for public servants, which is above inflation. And we're saying if you cut that to 3.5% this year, and for the next 2 years you increase their wages at the consumer price index rate, you could save 100 billion rand. We have 190 billion gap in our 3-year expenditure framework. Now, even if you said to me, we desperately need more maths teachers and we need more doctors, well, let's put some money into that, and then you could save about 60 billion over the 3-year period. So you have to put that issue on the table. You also have to put on the question of procurement. This is an enormous part of the state budget, and we artificially increase costs in this area with localization, with set-asides, with all sorts of conditions that push up procurement. Now, in the budget, they've put in 5.4% increase every single year of the 3 years. We're saying cut that to 3.5%, and we think, and make these policy changes. After all, we exempted Eskom from localization and other requirements, and then we had a year of almost no load shedding. So the experiment works. Do it for the rest of the economy. And
Politically, it'll be a hard pill.
50 billion.
Politically, it'll be a hard pill for the politicians to swallow, and an even harder sell to their constituents, because if we tinker with procurement rules around localization, some might read BEE into that, for example. You talk about decreasing that wage increase. If you go back on what has already been an agreement on the table as far as public sector wages are concerned, doesn't that make government a bad faith negotiator?
Look, you've got to accept South Africa is in deep trouble, and we have a fiscal crisis. We can't do this every single year. We've been cutting essential things. We're now saying, look at procurement. You've got to make some choices. We're also saying, look at the SETAs. Cut the SETAs. Nobody thinks they're doing a good job. That's 80 billion over 3 years. We recently did a study on the small business funding by the state, which seems to us to be grossly inefficient. We can't see where it goes, to whom. Do they improve as businesses? Do they employ more people? Have they closed down? Nobody seems to know. Cut that budget in half. That gives you probably another 9 to 10 billion. So we're making a number of suggestions. There's also the issue of ghost workers. So to think you can get out of trouble, which we've been building up for 15 years, without making hard choices is an illusion. And to just keep raising taxes when we spend that money so badly is also a bad approach. So we're saying use this as an opportunity, start to make some serious choices, in addition to our suggested cuts, have an additional sort of cabinet team to look for further cuts of low-impact programs over the next 3-4 months and try and find 40 billion that way. But in addition, the most important thing is unless South Africa grows our economy, we're going to get into more and more trouble. We can't afford all the things we want. So we're saying part of this budget deal should be an agreement to get serious about a growth strategy, and that should be a condition for agreeing to the budget.
The difficulty is that we are led by ideologues and not pragmatists. I mean, it feels to me that we've been merely stabilizing a compounding crisis. What happens, Anne, if we don't get this right? When does the population become restless and all of this explodes in our faces?
Well, I'm not in the prediction business. I think we are already a relatively unstable society. There's low-level protests going on all the time, sometimes violent, sometimes destructive. This is not good. But we can't carry on like this year after year. And I think everyone agrees we must get growth. The president says it's a top priority of the GNU. But what we're not seeing is some fundamental choices, which are hard, on how we're going to get growth. So the GNU has been disappointing so far in terms of, let's call it, big, bold, and fast reforms to get us much faster growth, which is essential for dealing with our unemployment catastrophe.
Let's hope somebody at Treasury is listening. Maybe the finance minister might look at some of your ideas. After all, Anne Bernstein is the executive director of the Center for Development and Enterprise.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.